Hello, and welcome to the 2015 Fall Fellows Voter Registration Training. My name is Mimi Marziani. I am the legal director here at Battleground Texas. I'm here with one of my fabulous voter protection program interns, Matt. And we are going to walk you through the key rules that you need to know to successfully register people to vote in Texas this fall. And so without further ado, we're going to get started on a PowerPoint presentation and run through that for the next 20-25 minutes. Wonderful. So there are 3 goals for this session. We want to learn the key laws governing voter registration in Texas. We want to learn about volunteer deputy registrars, what that means and how you can become deputized. And we want you to leave with confidence in your ability to register voters in strict compliance with the law. So the agenda for this is short and pretty sweet. We're going to talk about becoming a VDR, collecting and submitting forms, and running a registration event. So to start, how do you become a volunteer deputy registrar? Well, I guess to really start, what is a volunteer deputy registrar? So in Texas, you have to be a VDR, a volunteer deputy registrar, in order to collect a voter registration form from a voter. If you're not a VDR, you can never touch a completed or partially completed voter registration form. A VDR is entrusted with the responsibility and privilege of registering citizens to vote in Texas. This is a very important job, and it's one that we take incredibly seriously here at Battleground Texas. As a VDR, you will be charged with increasing voter registration across Texas and making sure that every eligible Texan is properly registered to vote. But in order to do so, you have to make sure that you follow the rules we'll talk about today. And these rules are incredibly important. We'll go over this a couple times, but it is imperative that you follow the rules. Otherwise, you could lose your VDR status, or you could even face criminal penalties. So one very important fact about VDRs. VDR designations are county specific. This means that a VDR can only handle forms from counties where he or she is currently deputized. In other words, you need a VDR certificate from Travis County to register a resident of Travis County. If you are deputized in Travis County, you cannot register a voter from Harris County unless you also become certified there. In practical terms, this means that you have to ask every voter where he or she lives, which you have to ask the voter's county of residence in advance of registering that person to vote or handling their form. That's the only way that you can ensure that you are following these rules. That said, everybody, no matter what your VDR status is, everybody can participate in voter registration activities in other ways, including by talking about voting. I mean, talking about voting is protected by the US Constitution, so you can always be out there as an ambassador of the culture of voting in Texas. So you can urge other people to register to vote. You can hand out mail-in voter registration forms and tell someone to fill it out and send it in later. And you can answer questions about voter registration. So if somebody, for instance, wants to know whether they have to put their resident address on a voter registration form, you could answer that question. To become a VDR, you must be eligible. And to be eligible, you have to be a US citizen and a Texas resident. You have to be otherwise eligible to vote, meaning that you have never been declared mentally incapacitated, also meaning that if you have ever been convicted of a felony, you have fully completed your sentence, you are quote unquote off paper. So you have to be eligible to vote. You have to complete a VDR training program through a county registrar's office, and that has to be done every 2 years. So even if you went through a training in 2014, you actually have to do it again in 2015. And then finally, as we just discussed, you have to be where you want to register voters. So one note about the training. The state is actually responsible for creating a training program that the counties administer. But every county administers the program a little bit differently. Some counties have online training that you can do. Others allow you to take the training on a walk-in basis. Other counties still will only give their trainings once a month or will offer them on a very, very limited basis. You should talk to your neighborhood team leaders and super volunteers in your turf, as well as any local field organizers, to make sure that you learn about this process as soon as possible. And as we'll talk about at the end, you can always contact our team as well if you have questions. One final note about training. Once you have gone through the training in one county, you do not need to go through it again in another county in order to be deputized in that other county. Instead, the other county must deputize you upon request as soon as you show that you've gone through the training in this cycle. So in other words, I have personally gone through the training this cycle in Harris County. That means that I could drive over to Galveston, show them my certificate from Harris County, and Galveston is required to deputize me as a VDR in Galveston. And so now that we've talked about what you need to do to become a VDR, I am going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to cover the procedures for collecting and submitting completed voter registration forms.
So to start off, we're going to talk about voter eligibility. To be eligible to register to vote, a person must be a U.S. citizen, a resident of the county of registration, 18 years old, or within 2 months of her birth date, which must occur before the election day, and currently not serving a sentence for a felony conviction. You must never register someone to vote if you know that person is not eligible. But it's not a VDR's job to verify that that person is actually qualified. That job belongs to the county registrar. In other words, you must take an applicant's word on their own qualifications to register to vote. Students often wonder where they qualify as a resident. Under Texas law, a voter's residence is the place where she currently physically lives and intends to live for some future period. But there's no minimum required time that a person must have physically lived in a place to be considered a resident. There's also no minimum time that a person must intend to stay in that place to be a resident. Students may not be subject to different standards than any other voter, and they can establish residency either in their college town or in their parents' hometown or somewhere else if that's appropriate in their case. This is a copy of a blank voter registration form. As a VDR, you must make sure that the voter correctly fills out every necessary field. Luckily, each step of the form walks the voter through the information that must be provided. Once the voter has filled out the form, the VDR must review the form for completeness in the voter's presence. Now let's take a look at a completed voter registration form. The required fields are the applicant's full name, residence address, and a valid mailing address if the applicant does not receive mail at his residence. Date of birth, Texas driver's license number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number, and the applicant's signature and date of signature. The applicant must also check 3 boxes at the top of the application. One to affirm that they are a U.S. citizen, another to confirm that they are of voting age, and one to indicate if their application is a new application, an update to their registration, or if they're just requesting a new voter registration card. Be sure that the applicant has read and understands the statement she's agreeing to when she signs the form regarding voter qualifications. There are also fields for the applicant's gender and phone number, but those are optional. A few things to remember when registering voters. The residential address cannot be a PO box. If mail cannot be delivered to the applicant's residential address, they must provide an address where they can get mail. This is especially important for students who may live in a dorm but have a separate address where they get mail on campus. Make sure the voter puts his or her birth date and not today's date. And also the voter must provide a Texas driver's license number or social security number if he has one. If not, he must check the box indicating that he has neither of those identification numbers. And finally, make sure that the voter signs and dates the application. You must issue a receipt for every form you collect. The PDF forms that are provided online by the Secretary of State and the hard copy forms provided by many county registrar offices have a built-in receipt at the bottom of the form. Fill it out with your name, signature, and your VDR number and give it to the voter. If the county where you're registering voters uses a receipt book or some other form of receipt, follow the instructions provided by that county office. This is a very important point. All voter registration forms that you collect must be turned in to the appropriate county office by 5 p.m. On the 5th day after collection. This includes regular days, not just business days. But if the 5th day happens to fall on the weekend or on a holiday, the deadline is extended to the next business day. This means that if you collect a voter registration form on a Tuesday, those forms are not due until the following Monday because the 5th day falls on Sunday, which is a weekend. Although you have 5 days to return the forms, you should turn them in as soon as possible to avoid any possibility that you would miss the deadline. And remember, every single form must be submitted no matter what. And one more thing, VDRs cannot refuse to register a voter because they disagree with the person's political beliefs or partisan affiliation. Registering voters is a big responsibility, and there are serious penalties for non-compliance with these laws. A VDR who submits an incomplete form can be banned by the county from further voter registration activity. In addition, a VDR who submits a form after the deadline or fails to submit a form can face criminal penalties. And anyone who purports to act as a VDR in a county without a proper appointment can also face criminal penalties. This is not to scare you, but to make you aware of the responsibility that VDRs have to register voters in compliance with the law. Make sure that you understand what is expected of you and follow all the rules. Ask your supervisor if you are unclear or have any questions. And a few more reminders. Do not register a voter if you're not a VDR. Do not register a voter if you're not deputized in that voter's resident county. And do not handle a completed registration form if you are not deputized in the voter's specific resident county. But do remember these best practices when registering voters. Make sure to ask an applicant what county they live in before registering them to vote. Register as many voters as you can in any county where you're a VDR. Make sure to follow all rules for registering voters, but also have fun. And just a quick review, VDRs can register citizens to vote. The certification process is done on a county basis. You can only register a voter if you are deputized in the applicant's county of residence, and all collected VR forms must be turned in to the county office within 5 days of collection. I'm going to turn it back over to Mimi, who will discuss how to run a voter registration event.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. So to run a successful voter registration event, I always suggest 6 guidelines for you to remember and to follow. Number 1, prepare. Make sure that you are completely ready in advance of all of your registration events. And this means securing plenty of forms, making sure that you have printed off from the Secretary of State's website the standard VDR form offered there, or that you've gone to your county registrar's office and gotten many, many copies of the forms from the county itself. In addition, make sure that you have many copies of the mail-in forms. These are the standard, sometimes called the federal postcard forms. Make sure you have plenty of those because you can hand those out to anybody who lives in a county where you are not VDR'd. Best practice, pro tip, is to locate the nearest mailbox. That way, if somebody shows up, let's say you're registering people to vote at the Texas State Fair, and all of your VDRs are certified in the counties surrounding the city of Dallas, and somebody shows up and they're from El Paso. If this happens, you hand them a mail-in form, you can point them towards the mailbox, and they will still get registered to vote. And so in general, try to identify and solve likely problems like this in advance. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is confirm. As Matt said, in advance of starting any voter registration activity, you need to make sure that you know which of your volunteers are VDRs and which are not. All VDRs have to sign our voter registration agreement and check into the event. And as a reminder, we have people check in and check out using the same sheet. You also must see every volunteer's certification before you let them register voters. And this is very important too, because the law specifies that any member of the public can demand proof of your VDR certification at any time. And so we need to make sure that all of our volunteers are not just properly deputized, but they have their certification with them. So number 1 is prepare. Number 2 is confirm. Number 3 is organize. Make sure that you set clear procedures for your volunteers so that everybody knows all of these rules. It's always helpful, and Priscilla and the other members of the field team will have other trainings to remind you of how to kick off a successful registration event. But make sure that you are communicating all of these key rules to your volunteers. Make sure your volunteers know what time to meet when the event is done. Make sure that you have a clear procedure for collecting forms, and if applicable, collecting receipts as well. And that last part is only going to matter if you're in a county that has a receipt book or some sort of separate receipt system. Number 4, ask. Every single applicant has to be asked their county of residence before you hand them a form. And you just need to figure out a reliable system so that you and all of your volunteers are consistently asking every voter where they live before you register them to vote. Review. As Matt said before, VDRs are required to review registration forms for completeness before turning them in. So keep an eye out for common mistakes while the voter is going through the form. I'll give you one example. All the time, people accidentally write today's date instead of their birth date. If you are keeping an eye on common mistakes like that, you should be able to prevent many of them in advance. And finally, number 6 is submit. Every single form that is collected in a Battleground Texas registration event has to be turned in to the county registrar. And this includes a form that, let's say they're at a college campus and somebody fills out half their form and then they run away. You need to turn in that halfway completed form. Let's say that a form has a clearly false name, that somebody, for whatever reason, writes down that their name is Donald Trump. In this situation, you have to still collect that form and turn it in to the county. You do not need to submit your forms personally. You can give them to another Battleground Texas VDR to submit on your behalf. That said, all forms have to be submitted in person, meaning that you can never mail your VDR forms to the county. All of them have to be submitted in person. And as we discussed earlier in the presentation, all forms have to be submitted by 5 p.m. on the 5th day after collection or by any other deadline set by law. And once you get very, very close to a registration deadline, your 5-day period will be minimized and you'll have to turn them in by the registration deadline. We will remind you of that as we reach those deadlines. So to review, prepare, confirm, organize, ask, review, and submit. I know we are throwing a lot of information at you, but you can always contact your supervisor or our voter protection team if you have questions. In addition, we ask that you contact us immediately if any of these things happen. If you know of anybody who collects a form from a county where they're not deputized, I need you to tell us right away. If you know of any forms that are submitted after deadline, I need you to tell us right away. If you know of any forms that are lost or stolen, tell us right away. If you are videotaped or otherwise harassed while performing voter registration activities, it doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. If that happens to you, I need you to tell us right away. And then finally, if you experience problems with counties and any county refuses to accept a voter registration form, you need to tell us right away and we will take care of that. And again, in general, if you have any questions, you can reach my team by calling the Voter Protection Hotline, 1-844-TX-VOTES. You can call that number 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and leave a message, and we will get back to you very, very quickly, typically within 24 hours. In addition, you can submit questions online. This link is available on Battleground Texas's website under a tab that says questions about voting. And so that is it. If you have questions about the material covered in this video, you can contact your organizer or a supervisor, or you can call our hotline or contact us through the portal on the website. Thank you very, very much for your attention during this video, and thank you so much for your support of Battleground Texas and our important work, and for all of the great organizing you're going to do out in the field.